It is such an atomic bomb in the ground zero of your family that how do you begin to recover from that?
It's very important that we as survivors do tell people and kind of chip away at that shroud of secrecy around suicide so that we can talk about it more openly. It's better than it used to be, no question, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to Trailheads with Jim Barrett. I'm Jim Barrett. And today I'm joined by my good friend, Susan Salentano, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a specialty in grief and bereavement. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for having me. Good
It's
morning.
great, it's great to see you. This particular podcast being about trailheads, it centered originally on my love of hiking and being outdoors. And I started a hiking group in SoCal about 5 years ago. And for me, it's some hiking in addition to just being good exercise for the physical body and a great way to have fellowship with other hikers. It's also for me a way to kind of keep my head clear if I'm feeling down in the most surface of depressed states or or whatever, just to feel grateful. And I know you and I have talked a little bit about this. Can you talk about your connection and what nature is for you?
A little over 30 years ago now, my partner died by suicide. I was there at the time, and it was a soul crushing experience. I had just become licensed as a therapist and didn't have a practice yet. But it was about 3 years, and I don't mean to scare people about grief when I say it took 3 years for me really to get my footing back. And part of that was developing a relationship with nature. I believe that in grief, we need to find something that's transcendent because grief is so soul crushing. It diminishes our senses. It, uh, it, it, it it dulls, I guess is a better word, our senses. It's almost like a crisis of inspiration. I like to refer to it that way. So we need to restore inspiration. We need to restore a sense of wonder. And for me, nature did that. Actually, three things did that for me that were transcendent: music, animals, and nature. And we're here to focus today on the nature aspect of it. When I'm outside and I'm walking around, and this started all those years ago after my partner died, and I had that almost like walking in slow motion. I was very, as I said, dulled and diminished, almost on autopilot. I wasn't aware. I wasn't seeing things anymore. I wasn't seeing color. Some say that grief is the world turns black and white, and that absolutely happened for me.
Right.
So when I'm walking outside now, and what I started to develop way back then was noticing things, noticing colors, noticing flowers, noticing the birds, feeling the earth beneath my feet, looking up at the sky, um, and recognizing that I'm a part of that, uh, and reestablishing kind of a sense of belonging
Hmm.
was what I was doing.
That's a great way to put it. I will tell the viewers, the listeners here, that I am a survivor of suicide, which we'll go into here in a moment. Which means that in my case, it's not that I attempted it and survived; it's that my brothers and I lost our mom to suicide when I was 12 years old. My brothers were 8 and 4 years old, and it's something that's been obviously a part of my life since the day that happened. And how I found Susan, it was 15 years later. I was talking to a therapist, and she recommended to me, "Hey, would you ever think about trying a survivors after suicide support group?" And I said, "What is that?" And she said, "Well, it's a group where people who have lost someone to suicide are able to grieve and cope and help one another through it." And my question was, "Well, it's been 15 years for me. Is that really going to help me, or how is that going to?" Am I gonna be just sort of sticking out like a sore thumb? And she goes, "I don't think so." This therapist I'd gone to on and off for years, and so she knew me well, and she knew how this event that had happened in my life had played out in my life in other ways. But she said, "Number one, yes, you're right. It's been a long time for you, but I think the others in the group may see that as a source of inspiration because they're in the middle of that trauma right now, having just lost someone, most of the people in these 8-week groups that we'll talk about." But she said also too, I think that you'll see people who have grieved very similar to how you have and others who are completely different. And however you do it is the way that you do it. So I met Susan in that first 8-week group in the, about 92 or 93, I think it was, and then we talked and thought that we might make a good team, you as a professional in psychotherapy, both of us survivors, which is huge in these groups. So thank you for that. Thank you for, helping change my life, and it really was a game changer for me.
Yeah. And just to say to the viewers, Jim was an excellent co-facilitator. We made a very good team. Again, we were both survivors. I was a licensed therapist. He survived his mom's suicide. And we just made a very good team for people coming in struggling with this loss 3 months, 6 months since the event happened. And we, I think, provided a sense of strength to them and hope
Yeah.
that both of us had survived this kind of loss.
You know, we use the word hope a lot, but I think that's key to what we're going to talk about today is that sense of hope that we can share with one another, whether sometimes whether we're even aware that we're doing it or not, just by our being, you know, just by being in the room and I said I'm not going to do it, but I'm 5 minutes in and I'm already getting a little bit teary eyed. But it's
I've been a therapist now for 35 years, and I tell my clients most of my practice is grief, and many of them suicide grief. And I tell them right from the beginning, I get teary. And I feel like the day I stop doing that is maybe the day I should stop working in this field.
mm,
Uh, so much sorrow here that, and we connect with these people on such a deep level that if we're not touched, if we're not moved in some way by the process, then possibly we don't belong there. So I also get teary, Jim, and I don't try to hide it.
yeah.
Uh,
That's a great point. So how do we define exactly what a survivor after suicide is? What does that mean?
well, it's a person who's lost someone to suicide, obviously. Usually it's what we call the first tier losses. A first tier loss is a spouse or partner, a parent, a child, or a sibling. Now, we also have people in the groups who've lost a friend, a colleague. So those certainly are survivors as well. But usually it's those four first tier relationships that bring people to our groups and to therapy. Suicide. There's many grief support groups out there. Many grief self-help group books. Lots out there these days about grief and loss. Suicide grief is different. And it's because suicide is different, right? Let's look at what's different about suicide. The death is violent. The person is alone when they die, probably agitated and or depressed. There's religious prohibitions against suicide. There's societal shame and judgment about suicide. So the survivors are dealing with those aspects that apart from maybe homicide, that also is violent and has some of those aspects. But suicide has two things that no other deaths have. One is the element of choice.
Mm,
Person has made a choice to end their lives. The other is the existential issues that arise when someone is dealing with someone who has taken their life, especially a loved one. It can be perceived as rejection.
right.
Why wasn't I enough is something that many survivors ask. The philosopher Albert Camus, he said, there is but one serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. So
Mm,
there's that existential, Shakespeare, Hamlet, right? To be or not to be,
mm.
right? To be or not to be. And when someone chooses not to be, it goes against our life preservation instinct.
So I want to touch on one thing that you mentioned
Yeah.
there. This becomes a source of debate a lot of times. Well, I'll
Mhm.
just say this real quick too, because I realize that we kind of blew past it. The 8-week Survivors After Suicide support group that several organizations do, and that Susan and I actually participated in and co-led together with 2 different groups over time. The 8-week program is basically a lifeline for people who mostly have just lost someone to suicide, and it's an 8-week program that we'll go into more detail here in a moment about what we do during those 8 weeks, but it's basically for people who have lost a loved one, a friend, a colleague, as you said, to this unique type of loss, which is suicide. And when you mentioned choice a moment ago, this a lot of times comes up in our 8-week groups. and that some people will say, well, it wasn't a choice. They were clinically depressed, or they weren't themselves. They were on drugs or alcohol, or that it wasn't really because some people really have a problem saying the term commit. They committed suicide as if it's a crime. Whereas in my mind, because I do use that term, and for me, it just means that they committed to the act.
Mhm.
So I wanted to ask you more about choice. Can you talk more about that, the choice aspect of it?
Yeah, and that's huge, as you said, and always comes up whether I'm doing an individual therapy with someone or the groups that you're referring to. Always comes up this element of choice. Many people feel that their loved one was mentally ill,
Right.
that therefore their thinking was clouded, was unclear, was distorted, and so they weren't able to make a reasonable choice.
Mm,
Um, they say, the experts say that 90% of people who die by suicide, they were mentally ill. That's up for debate, right? I mean, we just don't know. And many times that diagnosis is made after the fact because of the act of suicide itself. Because they killed themselves, they must have been mentally ill.
right.
Um, so, did they make a choice that was reasonable, valid for them? I don't know. That's something that we grapple with in the groups, and I certainly will always open that up for discussion because I think it's worthwhile for people to consider, why did my loved one come, how did it come to this?
Mm,
How did they get to the point where they felt like suicide was their only option? And was it a choice that was made with a reasonable, rational mind? Yeah, definitely something that perspective is so much in grief.
mhm.
Each of us has to find our own perspective and what we believe to be true about the suicide that we experience in our lives.
Right, there's so many levels to this. I remember as a because I was a kid, and so people spoke to me probably differently than maybe they did to you.
Yeah.
Some people say stupid things, some people say things from a very wise place. I just appreciate I remember even as a kid saying under my breath that, some relatives as well, "She was very selfish, Jimmy. You have to understand that she was very selfish when she did it." And I remember in my 12-year-old mind, I thought, I don't know if that's what it was, but okay, and I appreciated that in this case, it was my late grandpa who was saying that to me.
Mm.
And I thought, was it selfish? Was it really? And over time, it took me decades to really process this from our conversations, from other survivors that I met over time, and also, which we're going to talk about movies and how movies had an effect too on how I healed over time. But for me, it being her choice, I felt like my mom in her situation was in a place that she felt like we were probably better off without her. And sometimes that comes up as well. I wouldn't agree with that, but I think in her mind, and some things that she had suggested even to me as a kid, and that said to my dad and other friends, she didn't think that she was a particularly good mom, and thought that maybe in the end that this was her only choice. Can you talk a little bit about that of people who come to that sort of decision?
Yes. And your situation, Jim, always struck me in these 8-week groups that we're talking about. We share photographs during one of the sessions. And I remember very clearly, this was over 30 years ago now, I think, right? You said 92 or 90, 93. Um, when Jim brought his photograph to the group, and it was of him, his two younger brothers, and his mom. And here I'll probably get teary, but they just adorable little boys, three adorable little boys with their mom. And you look at that picture and you think, how could she leave these three boys, her own children?
Yeah.
So, this element of choice, if someone is able to do that, what's going on with them? Was she thinking clearly? You talked about films. There's a movie called The Hours, which I believe is, I don't know, 15 years old now, maybe, with Meryl Streep, Julianne Moore. There's a character in that movie who attempts suicide, doesn't complete, but she does attempt, and she ends up not killing herself, but leaving her family. She was pregnant at the time and she had a little boy. She left the little boy and the newborn child and just split. She says to the Meryl Streep character, kind of explaining how she could do what she did. And she said, "It's what you can bear. It's what you can bear." And that always stayed with me, that the person who dies by suicide doesn't do so flippantly or even impulsively. It's a decision that they had been making for a long time, over an extended maybe period of time. And for whatever reason, they could no longer bear their lives,
Right.
whether psychic torment or depression or circumstances, whatever it may have been for each individual, it had crossed their threshold. They could no longer bear it.
Right.
So I'm not sure if that answers your question, Jim, but that's where your question took me.
It does, because there's a number of films out there. There's one that I bring up that almost nobody remembers, that it was one of it may have been Keanu Reeves' first film. It's called Permanent Record. And if you were to find it on VHS or wherever you could find it, it came out really as he was about to emerge as a star. It was in the late '80s. It was '86 or '88. He's very much the dude that he goes on to play in Bill and Ted's and others, except this character, is the best friend of a young man who kills himself. And, it's they're high the characters are all high schoolers, and, his best friend seems to have it all going on. He's very handsome. He's making great grades. He just got a scholarship to a music school. He's a musician. The two of them are in a band together. And he decides at this party, he walks off the cliff. And, uh, you know, people make fun of Keanu Reeves and his style of acting, but obviously Susan, here I go.
You're you're
Here I
fine,
go.
Jim. You're fine.
But what was so brilliant about Keanu's performance, I thought, was that, nobody can say, "Oh, of course they did it," or very rarely do we have this opportunity to sort of see it coming, and Keanu's character definitely didn't see it coming, so how yeah, if he did it, what about all of us?
Mhm.
And, I just thought it was beautifully played. It was this little indie film, and I remember I saw a trailer for it on MTV because Keanu was also, like, doing these little MTV promo interstitials back in the early days of MTV. I just thought it was a really good little film that spoke about a few levels of this, but the crux of it being his character being a survivor, a reluctant survivor, as we really all are. We don't wanna be a survivor. We don't wanna have to have experienced this. And yet here we are with it. And so I think that's where the 8-week group picks up too, is that, yeah, there's a club I really don't want to be in, but since I am, I kind of like to meet other people like me.
Yeah. And that's one of the great lessons, if you will, of grief is to connect. Connection is
Yeah.
how we start to heal from grief. And that connection can be with people in the 8-week groups as you're talking about, or or your community, family, whoever your tribe is.
Hmm.
And if you don't have a tribe, finding one like SAS became a tribe for me and perhaps for you too. And also connecting, as we were referring to later, with nature. The connection, it's equally important, right? Connecting with people and connecting with something transcendent like nature. So connection, yeah, big piece of healing in grief in general, not just suicide grief, of course.
Another film that comes to mind that's very controversial, in part now because of who stars in it, and that was Robin Williams in
Is it what dreams may
What
come?
Dreams May Come. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
But on a couple of levels, his kids die in a terrible car crash, and then his wife takes her life. And there are these sort of very supernatural scenes. He and his wife, they both loved the arts and loved paintings, and they had these beautiful paintings in their house. And so he's sort of in these living paintings in the movie. But because the wife, took her life, I remember I don't remember when that movie came out. I wanna say late '80s, early '90s. But one of the subjects that came up a lot in the group was the stance at one time of the Catholic Church of, well, those who take their lives are condemned to hell or, purgatory. Can you speak on that, where that was at one point, where
Well,
that
yeah, in fact, the Catholic Church changed that in their catechism. I believe it was mid-90s, perhaps mid-90s, around there, when they changed their stance about suicide, and it's in their catechism. I used to carry the catechism around with me to groups to
Mhm.
show people. That it used to be that it was a sin, as you suggested, but now it says something, and I'm paraphrasing, something like suicide is the result of severe mental distress. But it changes it, doesn't it? From a sin to someone who's really struggling in life,
Yeah.
struggling with mental distress to the
Mhm.
point where they can no longer bear it, as I said. So most religions, Reform Judaism and Catholicism, have both changed their stance about suicide. It used to be so prohibited that they would deny the person who died by suicide burial in cemeteries, and they would be buried like a crossroads.
Mm.
The family would be shunned by the community. So certainly that has changed over the years. Although, as I said earlier, there is still judgment and criticism of suicide. The gentleman who said to you, "Your mom was selfish."
Yeah. Well, I wanted to touch on that too, was the shame that my mom's death was in 1977, and she's buried in a Houston cemetery, and it is on the outer periphery of what was once the cemetery, but it's kind of a relief knowing that. I know that brought a lot of comfort to some people who are especially Catholic. I think even those who are not, and even not necessarily spiritual, because we don't know exactly what's next.
Although I have to say, Jim, there is still shame, judgment, I guess is the word, about suicide that's embedded
Mm.
in our society, coming from those old archaic ways of thinking. And even though those have been changed, it remains in our society. And I'm not saying I'm not condoning suicide by any means, but the idea that it's bad, wrong, a sin, it should be shunned. It was selfish. All of these negative words that people use to talk about suicide.
In the middle of our serving together over the years, I had, because I work in the film and television industry. I'm an editor, um, and I'd made these little short films going back all the way to 8th grade, but I had this story that I wanted to tell, and I wasn't sure how to tell it, but it was about being a survivor. And I made this film in the early 2000s that's called Different Places. And the crux of it is about 3 people who have lost someone to suicide and how they've been affected in 3 very different ways. And the 3 that I, as a filmmaker, wanted to explore the most was someone who was left with a legacy of anger, another one who was in denial and guilt, and then the other one is the legacy itself, is a young girl is about to commit suicide herself, having lost her mom as a child. So you and I had a lot of conversations about this, and at one point, we actually used Different Places in our 8-week group to share with other survivors to sort of spark discussion. But it was something that I really needed to explore it as an artist, and so I wrote, produced, directed it, and one of the people who stars in it, he's definitely a survivor and has lost several people in his life. So I wrote it for specifically for him, and then as we were making the film, other people would come up and say, "Hey, I lost my dad to suicide, but we never talked about it." And somebody else said, "My best friend in high school, but we had this lie that we told that she, accidentally shot herself with a gun." And so these other sort of things that come out of the woodwork when you say it, a little stream of consciousness here, but every year around the time of the anniversary of my mom's death, it's in January, I do a post on Facebook about it. It's really, I try and use my experience, as I know you do as well, as sort of a tool for other people to be able to say, "Oh, me too. That happened to me and we never talked about it." One guy I worked with at one of the big networks, we'd worked together at that point for 3 or 4 years and was literally sitting in the same room at the same desk right next to each other. And a conversation one day went to the fact that I lost my mom to suicide. And he literally sat up from the editing console. He says, "Jim, I lost my dad to suicide when I was a teenager. And we always said that it was a heart attack, that it was an accident." And I'm like, "Really?" I said, "Who have you talked to about it?" He says, "Nobody." And it's so amazing how common that is, that because of the shame and all of
Mhm,
these things we're talking about. I'm sorry, I'm passing it to you, but there's a whole lot of stuff in there that I just said. Do you wanna
mhm.
comment on any of that?
You're right, there was a lot in there. The one thing about survivors telling people, and it's very important that we as survivors do tell people and kind of chip away at that shroud of secrecy around suicide so that we can talk about it more openly. It's better than it used to be, no question, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And part of it is on the survivors to talk about it so that when they meet someone new who doesn't know about their loved one and they say, "Well, how many kids do you have? Or are you married?" or whatever it is, and you say, "Well, my spouse died or my child died. I had 2 children and 1 died." Invariably, the person is going to say, "How?
What
How did
happened? Right.
what happened?" Um, to be able to say suicide, however you want to put that, died by suicide, took his own life, however way you say that, but to be able to say it. We sometimes call suicide grief disenfranchised grief.
Mm.
or stigmatized grief. Okay, because the survivors don't get the comfort and compassion necessarily that survivors of other kinds of loss get. And they have that tendency to hold back, to be hesitant to tell someone, "Oh, my son died by suicide."
Right.
So that yeah, that makes the grief journey again even more challenging for people because of the stigma and shame surrounding suicide.
Yeah. One of my favorite guys we used to see in the groups years ago, he's passed away since then, not by suicide, um, but was a big guy.
Hmm.
He had been in the Marines, was in Vietnam, had lost friends in Vietnam, and then afterwards to suicide, and had had a number of suicides in his family. And this is a guy who would come to the group, and he'd come and hug and laugh, and and say hi to all of his regulars. But then when he would sit down, he would just go into that place. And the reason I bring him up is because he, when people who are new to suicide loss, a lot of them will say, "Gosh, am I gonna be dealing with this, 15, 20, 25 years down the line?" And the answer is, I mean, it depends. I mean, it's not gonna just go away. It's not, when some people say, "Just get over it." Well, that ain't gonna happen, right? I mean, in a loss period, it doesn't gonna happen. But certainly with suicide, with all the other things that we've touched on, grief, anger, finger pointing, but he knew how to when he came into that group, because he had had so much, unfortunately, loss, he was a skilled survivor who came into that room and could be himself, but he when he went into that sacred space, he would be in it for that hour, right? And then afterwards, for the most part, afterwards he could be welcoming people, and he was just such a godsend, you know? But what I especially appreciated from him was his ability to do that, and knowing that he could come into the group and be okay and be social and, um, be all of those things, so much trauma that this man had been through.
Yeah.
And I looked at him and I'm like, "If you can do that, I wanna be like that."
Yeah, yeah. And of course, I know who you're referring to, and I loved him. I won't say his name now out of respect for him, but we became friends, and I have still a very deep affection for him. But you make a good point about grief and how long we carry it. Well, we carry it forever for the rest of our lives. We will carry it. It's how we carry it that will change.
Yeah,
Um, y- y- with regard to the him coming to the group and using that time to really move into that space and allow himself to be there again and to grieve and to receive support from the other group members outside of the group, he was okay, right?
right, right,
He was a teacher. He did well. He was married. Um, People come to the group, and sometimes when we go around the circle saying who we lost and when, and somebody say, "Oh, I lost my dad, 18 years ago." And the new survivors that are at 6 months or 1 year will say, "Oh my goodness, you're still here
mm,
after 15 years or how?" But it's because of what you're saying that it's a place to go to once a month or however often they come and go back there, go back to that place, revisit it, see what's still there, be able to receive support from people. As I said earlier, suicide is a profound event. Death is a profound event. Loss is a profound event. It's the biggest thing we have to our biggest challenge in life is loss.
yeah.
So we need to go back and we need the support of kindred spirits, I like to call them in the support groups.
Yeah. One thing, because you just touched on it, is that our friend who we were just talking about, he was a part of the, monthly groups. So
Yes.
in the programs that we've worked in, there is the 8-week group, which deals with the sort of, for the most part, immediate aftermath. It's been weeks, it's been a couple of months since, we lost our loved one. In some cases, though, like me and some others come years later for different reasons. But after the initial 8-week group, most people by the end of the 8 weeks are like, "Oh, it's coming to an end." I was really, just as I was getting connected with these other people and my feelings. But then there's also this monthly group that you continue to facilitate those now?
Yeah, yes, I do, and it is wonderful. And every time I facilitate a group, I leave with something. even after all these years. And it's just such a privilege to be able to continue to facilitate these groups. And actually, so there's the 8-week group and then there's the monthly group. And in my practice, I developed a program called Beyond Surviving
Mm,
because, as you say, at the end of the 8 weeks, people say, okay, now what? I've survived. Especially after the first year, people will say, okay, I've survived a full year without my person. So I created this program called Beyond Surviving. And basically, it's workshops and groups that utilize techniques like writing and psychodrama to address the lingering aspects of grief, the unfinished business that they might have with their lost person.
right. Within the 8-week group, there is this cherished, group that often goes over. Most of our 8-week groups, each session is, I think, about 90 minutes, right? 60 or
Right.
90 minutes?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, almost always the picture day goes over. Can you just talk a little bit about picture day and what that means and why it's so important?
It's important for many reasons, but with suicide, there's a threat, and that threat is that the person's life could be eclipsed by their death. And that's what picture day for me is really all about. We want to see their loved ones skiing. We want to see them at the beach. We want to see them alive, smiling, interacting. Some people bring videos, video clips. Some people bring pieces of music that their loved ones composed, jewelry that they made, all kinds of things to show this was a person, a
Yeah,
complex, nuanced person, not a statistic, not a person who died not just a person who died by suicide.
right.
And that to me is the whole crux of the picture day session.
It really, like you were saying, so much of that, of the suicide loss is that. I think in this country especially, we have a hard enough time talking about loss, about death, but when you add the stigma of suicide, even in the year 2025, there's still stigma about it. Even though we've come so far in some ways, there is still that stigma, and oftentimes I think it comes from the survivor, that they're afraid that they'll be judged. Uh,
Sure.
so in my own life, I carried the torch of my biological mom's memory. My dad remarried a couple of years later, and she ended up being an awesome stepmom who ended up raising the 3 of us, especially my youngest brother, who was 4 at the time. Um, so I'm not gonna say that we didn't skip a beat, we just moved right on with another mom. It wasn't like that. But over time, I mean, it was such a and it is for so many people, it is such an atomic bomb in the ground zero of your family that how do you begin to recover from that? And so what I loved was that I became sort of the keeper of history about my mom and did some my own studies and interviewed family members and much of her family had passed away and we weren't really connected with them, but a handful of them were still around. And so I flew to Michigan and talked to one aunt and videotaped her.
Mm.
And over time, as my brothers got more comfortable with it, wanted to know more and have asked me questions over time. So it's nice to be able to keep that memory alive because they are so stigmatized as that person who committed suicide, that's all they are when there were so many other things. And I'm
Yeah.
so glad that you do that with the picture day. It's just so many emotions, but we get to at that point, we get to see who they're talking about and what we had pictured in our mind's eye, and then to see them. It's such an amazing and helpful part of the process, I think.
Yeah, and you earlier mentioned the word legacy, which to me is crucial in any kind of work that I do with survivors. At some point, I will always ask, what will your loved one's legacy be?
Mm,
Make sure that it isn't suicide.
yes.
And it really forces people to really think about that. Well, who was this person? I mean, so many people who die by suicide were talented in so many ways, very bright people, very involved, engaged people. I mean, sometimes we have this stereotype that people who are depressed or who have died by suicide are vegetative, not engaged with life. There's a meme that goes around on social media that shows many of the celebrities who have died by suicide. Robin Williams, you mentioned earlier, Kate Spade, Anthony Bourdain, who certainly seemed, right, very engaged with life, my goodness.
What do you believe is overall the mission of the 8-week support group?
I don't think it's just one thing. I think the one thing is, as I mentioned earlier, is connection. Connection. We need to be able to grief in general, and especially suicide grief, is isolating. Okay, you feel alone.
Mm,
So that's one of the functions of the group, is to bring people together and share their experiences so they know they're not alone. There are
right,
other people who have shared not the exact same thing, but something similar to
right.
what you experience. And that reduces that sense of loneliness and aloneness that comes with grief. The other thing is promoting legacy of the person who died, making sure that they are not going to be remembered as a statistic, as I said earlier. So those two things come to mind immediately, the connection and the legacy. So we're talking about it serves a purpose for the survivor and the person who died as well.
Yeah. There's another one that comes up for me too, and I can't remember if this is something I came up with on my own or if I borrowed it from you and changed it a little bit. So I apologize if it's the
That's
latter.
a
May very well be. But there's also especially for those who've just lost someone recently, there's this idea of there's this thing in their life. It's, you can't work without it being right there. You can't eat, you can't sleep because it's right here. And in the course of the 8 weeks, hopefully it's more like this, where we have, because it's always gonna be there. It's not like it's just gonna vanish. It's gonna always be here. But in the course of the 8 weeks, we can sort of be where we can live our lives. We can eat, we can work, we can, love, we can be with our friends, and it's not all consuming and right here in front of everything. Where eventually it's here where we have that choice to go back and go there and remember them.
yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. When it's over here, we have a choice to look or not look. Whereas in the beginning, it's just here and there is no choice. We're
Yeah.
being dragged around by grief. It has the upper hand, so to speak. It's
Yes.
dictating our actions. But the 8-week group does serve that function, to just get it to move slightly,
Yeah.
and then it will continue. You're building a momentum with restoring your connection to life.
So Susan, as we wrap up, thank you again so much for being my guest. It's just been it's always a pleasure to talk to you about it, to be able to talk about this subject as well. Um, but what can we tell viewers and listeners about where to go if you know somebody who's in crisis? I believe it's 988 is a number that's universal across the US. I'm in Atlanta, you're in Los Angeles, and it's the same number, right?
Yes, 988. And then the corresponding website is 988lifeline.org.
Okay.
Um, Also, if you're looking for a group or resources in your area, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, AFSP, has groups in almost every city across the country. So that is also a good resource. So 988 or AFSP, and
Okay.
you'll find resources in your local community.
First, I want to thank you, Susan, for doing this. I can't thank you enough for being my friend for all of these years, but also helping me creatively when I made different places. You were a wonderful voice in helping me to make that film and to gain some perspective. But I just thank you so much because you've been through a lot on your own too, and I'm so appreciative that you've joined me. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit because you're really good at closing our groups with a thoughtful takeaway. Is there something that you can leave with our viewers and listeners, to walk away from this heavy episode of Trailheads?
When you're walking, like I was all those years ago, and starting to notice again, we heal with our five senses, right? So if you're out there walking, listen, look, pause. If you hear something or you catch something in the glimpse of your eye, stop, turn your head and look. What is that?
Mm,
That'll reawaken your sense of wonder, your sense of curiosity. And that's the antithesis of grief, right? So that's what you want to do. So listen, look, taste, touch, all of that with your senses, to reawaken those senses to life, because we're still here. We're grieving, but we're still here.
I
So I guess that's the piece that I would suggest to people. Look, if you hear something, look, what is that?
mm,
Reawaken that.
I love that. See, you were so brilliant at this and using your life experience and all the experience you've had in the trenches and of these 8-week groups. So thank you again, Susan
Thank
Salentano.
you for having me, Jim. I really appreciate it, and I always enjoy my time with you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
And for Trailheads, we will see you and talk to you next time. Thank you for joining us.